My name is S. Lloyd Walters, and I'm the writer of a film series that I call The Scepter. It's a biblical epic, but it has elements of science fiction, mythology, action, warfare. It's an interesting piece that covers some territory that's been covered before in terms of biblical stories, but it takes us to a place we've never been before. And I think this film, while perhaps a little controversial, would be a real good box office hit. The story starts really with the dying or at the deathbed of a very famous character we know as Jacob. He's an old man, and his family is gathering to see him. He calls all of his sons together so that he can tell them the last things he's going to tell them before he passes away. This is recorded in the book of Genesis chapter 49. And as each son comes, he prophesies and predicts what's going to happen for each one of those sons in the future, in their future lives. But when he gets to his fourth eldest son, Judah, he has a very strange prediction. He says that the scepter shall not depart from Judah, neither shall a lawgiver from between his feet until he comes to whom it belongs. And that's where our story begins, where this prediction of the scepter is going to come along at some point, and someone's going to have it, someone's going to get a hold to it, and the rulership of all of the world and the nations will be his. And that's where our story starts, right there where Jacob predicts what's going to happen in the tribe of Judah. So Act 1 begins with a huge assembly in the city of God, and we are introduced to the main characters of this first film. We're introduced to a character that everybody should know by name. His name is Lucifer, but we meet him before he becomes an evil character. We meet him in complete cooperation with everything that's going on in God's kingdom. We meet also Gabriel, his lieutenant, who works closely with him, and also we meet the son, who is different from them but works beside them, even though he is equal to in every respect to the Father. And in this first huge assembly where all of these creatures are coming together to hear an announcement from heaven, an announcement is made that catches Lucifer by surprise and leads him in the direction of discontent and sedition. We see the spark of his discontent, and from that moment on we start to see, as he goes from event to event, from choir rehearsals to meetings to standing in the presence of God and being distracted. Even when he's confronted by the Son, he doesn't admit it, but we see him begin to sink deeper and deeper and deeper into discontent and sedition, and other angels are beginning to join him. And by the time we get to a second assembly where the announcement is made that God is getting ready to create a brand new place, a brand new planet, Lucifer at that assembly makes his rebellion known, and it begins a warfare between those that chooses Lucifer's sedition and those who choose to stay with loyal to the Father. And we have angel versus angel warfare. We have warfare on the streets of heaven, warfare in aerial warfare. It's going to be an amazing visual kind of scenes of this warfare between these supernatural beings. It's not a long battle, but after the battle is concluded, Lucifer and all of his supporters are brought back before the Father's throne, and they are expelled from heaven suddenly and violently. And that's how Act 1 ends. Act 2 begins with Lucifer traveling all over God's universe, trying to invite and draw people into his rebellion, unsuccessfully. And each time he goes to a new location, he's interrupted by Gabriel, who has stayed loyal to the Father, and telling him that this civilization this planet, this realm, is not interested in being a part of his rebellion. At the same time, God proceeds with his plan to build a brand new planet, a planet of creatures that are made to be just like him. And so, as Lucifer is going around trying to foment rebellion, God goes forward with the creation of man. At one point, Lucifer meets with the sun in an attempt to negotiate his way back into God's graces. But he is not willing to repent. He's not willing to admit any faults. In fact, he tells the sun that he thinks that heaven is at a loss with his absence. And as he speaks more and more, we hear more and more of his pride and his arrogance, to the extent that he realizes that he's reached a point where he can never go back. And so he leaves, making up his mind to ultimately do everything he can to destroy anything God creates. And it's that leads him to go into the garden and deceive the woman and then draw the man into his rebellion. As God creates man and woman, he hands Adam a scepter that symbolizes the authority over the entire planet that God had created. And he warns Adam to hang on to that scepter and guard that realm against any enemy or any intruder that might come in. And he promises to do so. And then the serpent is drawn into Lucifer's rebellion, and through the serpent, he draws Eve and then Adam into the rebellion. And as they partake of the forbidden fruit, Adam drops the scepter and runs away. And as he leaves, Lucifer gains access to the first realm that he ever had access to, where he can now rule. Ready? So, man has now fallen from the garden. Adam and Eve have eaten from the tree they shouldn't have eaten from. And now, instead of a beautiful, pristine earth, we now start to see the earth begin to be oppressive and hot. And Adam and Eve alone are out trying to start a life with all of the difficulties and the things that they'd never experienced before. Now, because they have violated what God told them to do, they're struggling to live, struggling to try to make a life. But at the same time, they have the hope that at some point they might be able to somehow get back into their garden home. Their firstborn, Cain, is born in the midst of these harsh situations, and hope springs with the idea that perhaps this is the seed that God was talking about that will help them crush that serpent's head and allow them to get back into that garden. And then a second child is born, and that child is Abel, and the two boys grow up somewhat differently. And then as they get to their teenage years, we start to see the seeds of Lucifer's kingdom begin to be expressed in the life of Cain. He's envious and jealous of his brother, and to the point that when a sacrifice was being made, Cain's envy and jealousy turns murderous, and we see the outgrowth of Lucifer's kingdom being fully expressed in Cain when he sneaks up behind his brother, bashes his head in, and uses a rock and crushes the life out of his brother. And at the same time this is going on out in the fields, his mother Eve senses something is wrong, sends Adam after her, and finally Adam returns with the lifeless body of Abel, and he places her in front of his distraught wife. She shakes and tries to bring him back to life, and realizes for the first time what death really means. And she shrieks out in horror and tries to, and realizes the finality of this death of her beloved Abel. She realizes, wait a minute, where's Cain? And Cain is not there. Cain was the one that perpetrated this crime. And then Adam, as she wails in absolute horror of the loss of Abel and the fact that her eldest boy, Cain, did this, Adam turns and walks away, realizing it was his actions that caused it, and his actions that caused the loss of the scepter. And this is where Act 3 ends, with the despair of the kingdom of Lucifer, now fully rooted in the kingdom of the earth. Okay. After the horror of losing one son to death and the other one disappearing and being exiled from the home of Adam and Eve is graced with one more child, Seth. And our movie ends with Seth and his father, Adam, going back to the eastern edge of the Garden of Eden, where he looks at the area where they once lived, and he tells them the story of how they were born and how they lost their paradise. And in the midst of telling that story, all of a sudden Adam notices way off in the distance the scepter that he lost, that was given to him by his father because of his disobedience in the garden. And that's where we end, and hopefully we'll figure out in the next few films how the scepter gets back into the right hand.